Hi, I'm Frank and welcome to my wood turning channel. This week's project is going to be something a little different. I've got these large square pine pieces that were given to me and I have a bit of a commission to turn some of them into end tables, and some of them are going to be large spheres. So they're quite large, quite heavy, and yeah, it's going to be a little bit of a challenge to do these, but we'll see what we get. I have a whole bunch of large pieces of pine that a customer gave me, and he wants me to do a commission. Some of it is going to be turned into tables, and some of it's going to be turned into just a sphere, basically. And these two pieces here are going to be done as a sphere. So they're quite large. This one's 14-inch diameter, and this one's about 10-inch diameter. So it's going to be a large sphere with a flat bottom on it so that it doesn't roll. And the commission is really just for an artistic piece. Fortunately, I'm going to leave all the cracks in it, so I don't have to worry about doing any crack filling. But getting a good surface finish and figuring out how to turn a sphere this large will be a bit of a challenge. I've done a lot of small ones between cup centers, but these ones I won't be able to do between cup centers. So I'm just going to use more of a geometrical method to come up with the sphere. After marking the center on both sides, I'm just going to hammer in this spur drive, and I'll just use that to drive this. Just showing that I'm using both my face shield and I have ear protection on as well. Now you can use a tiny little spindle gouge like this, but on a piece this large, I think that spindle gouge is just not sturdy enough, so I'm just going to use a nice big 3/4 inch bowl gouge to do the roughing. I've been using mostly push cuts here because the cut is so intermittent. Sort of hitting wood, air, and yeah, that's about all I can do at this point. But as I've taken more material off, now I'm going to use the side of the gouge, and this allows me to take a lot more material off quicker. Just measuring things up for the tenon here. This pine is really dulling the tools really quickly. I've had to switch gouges quite a few times, and I'm using Thompson powdered metal gouges, which are really good. They keep an edge for a long time. I guess the pine must have some sand or grit in it. Now that it's a cylinder basically, and there's a tenon on it, I'll turn things around and just mount it in the chuck. Now it's still quite heavy, so I will need tailstock support for all the cuts I'm going to do from now on as well. Now that there isn't as much in the way of intermittent cuts, I can actually use this spindle roughing gouge. Even though it's a small gouge, it does a reasonable job taking material off. Normally I would use calipers to get this into a perfect cylinder, but in this case I'm just using a really long tool rest and just measuring the distance away from the bed on each side, and that way I will be able to turn a relatively perfect cylinder. And here I'm just measuring all along to make sure that it's the same distance from the tool rest all the way along, and that gives me a perfect cylinder. Now, based on the diameter, I'm just laying out the center and the two ends of the sphere, which are also along the cylinder length. It's equal to the diameter of the cylinder as well. And here I'll just turn it down so that I'm turning down to the lines which will be the very end of the cylinder. So this sketch shows how I'm going to basically approach making the sphere. First I'll turn the flat sides to make an 8-sided octagon, and it's all based on the diameter. Here you can see the formula. The side of the octagon is equal to 0.414 times the diameter, and then we go from there. In this case, the cylinder diameter is 34.5 centimeters, just over a foot in diameter. Those two lines I just put on there right now, those are the top of the octagon. So I'll also put lines down the side of the cylinder, and that will define the octagon on the side as well. Now that I've marked the sides and the top, I just cut a 45-degree straight line to basically meet the two lines, and I'll do this on both sides. And I just check it every once in a while to make sure it's flat. So this pine isn't cutting all that well, so generally what I've been doing is I've made all the rough cuts with the 5/8 inch gouge, but then once I approach a final cut, I switch to a 1/2 inch really sharp gouge and just make a nice slow cut, and that gives me a pretty reasonable surface finish. So at this point I've got an octagon, but I need to make some additional lines here, and this will change this into, instead of an 8-sided polygon, it's now going to be a 16-sided polygon. The formula for this new length is shown on the sketch. And now I do the same thing. I just cut a straight line in between the two new lines that I've marked. And this will be another flat, and this will end up making this into a 16-sided polygon. I've gone through the description pretty quickly, but there are other YouTubes that go into it in a lot more detail. Basically, the octagon and the polygon intersect the sphere at certain points. So when you draw these straight lines, you know you're going to have those points are going to touch the sphere right at the proper spots. And there we are. We now have our 16-sided polygon, and you can see it's pretty well almost a perfect sphere now. All I'm going to do now is basically just by eye take off the little high points, and that'll get us very, very close to what we need. And from then on, I think the sanding will just do the rest. Normally I might have used a shear scraper to take off these little bumpy areas, but this pine is just so soft that I'm just using a really sharp spindle gouge to take off any little high areas. So I'll just mark it and then take a little bit more off here and there. That looks pretty darn good. I think we can move right to sanding. So I've started at 120, and I'll just go through the grits up to 400, and actually even up to 600 on this particular one, because that's what the customer asked for. Now I've removed the tailstock, and I'm just going to finish off this little piece that was supporting the cylinder with all of the weight off it. I'm just taking very, very light cuts, and just finish the top of this off and sand it off. The only way I could think of to take the tenon off was to put it into this great big giant vacuum chuck that I have. And I'll bring the tailstock up and just cut away the tenon as best I can. I'm not actually using a vacuum, I'm just using the chuck to hold the cylinder in this method, and that way it doesn't get dented up, because the pine is fairly soft, so I don't want to put any dents on it at this point. The sphere is going to have a flat bottom so that it sits flat and doesn't roll around, and the diameter of the bottom is approximately 4.5 to 5 inches in diameter. Like before, I'm going to do the final cuts with a spindle gouge. I get a much better finish with that than I do with the bowl gouge. To clean up the bottom, I'm just going to use this carbide burr to get rid of the high spots, and then I'll just use a sanding disc basically to just clean up the rest of it. And fortunately, I don't have to do any final finish on this piece. The customer is going to do the final finishing. And some pictures are coming up of both this large cylinder and then the smaller one that I turned as well.